Hello. Thank you so much for sticking around. I hope everybody is suitably caffeinated and has a sugar high from those excellent pastries. And let's get into it. So my name, as mentioned, thank you, is Ivana. I live and work in Vancouver in Canada. I was born in Bosnia, though, raised in Croatia, then Canada, spent several years in Scotland, and have a degree in psychology, and yeah, once upon a time did some neuroscience research. Today, UX design, but I've also been, or called myself, an interaction designer, a front-end dev, a UI designer, and a freelancer. And across all of these, I help to build web experiences, right? And CSS was always involved in them. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because as a result of all of it, I care a lot about, due to all of this change, both geographically and semantically, about how we build and reinforce human bonds on the web, how we value each other, and how our complexity as human beings affects and is affected by software. So now that I've rambled at you a little bit about me, I sort of turn this question back to you. And the next time that you're asked that, take a second maybe to think about your answer, right? It's never enough to just say, I'm a developer, or even I'm a web developer, right? We contextualize our work with the technologies and languages that we work with. But there's no agreed upon standard, really, right? Like, software developer or front-end engineer alone doesn't tell you much about what someone builds, what they use to build it, or the skills that they have. But those words have connotations, not just about what that person does, but how they got there. And we all see these things, as Teresa just showed, a little bit differently. And sure, I allow that sometimes it's just easier to simplify things, right? We don't always need to care about the details of someone else's work or how they got to where they're standing, but there are places where these shortcuts that we take are harmful, and the words that we use are important, right? Because they carry value and assumptions along with them. And how we talk about our work, about CSS, about how we learned web development, all of that matters, and that's what I want to talk about. The overarching point is that there's no concrete line, as the talks I showed today, between what's design, what's development, what's technical, what isn't. And if there is, it doesn't exist universally. Brad Frost called this the development identity crisis. Making great things today requires flexibility, collaboration, and respect of each other's skills, and not a universal capital D decision on what is and isn't development. And to sort of illustrate that, let's kind of rewind a little bit, because at first CSS was very much in the this is appearance bucket, right? Visuals were one thing, code's another, and everything is very easy. And then this happened, right? Again, Teresa just spoke about collaboration and how complicated it can be. It's fascinating because the lines between disciplines have blurred so much these days that we don't even know what makes design, what makes development. And this is because the web is no longer just a screen. We don't build websites, as I mentioned. We build experiences that reach across devices, across cultures, contexts, abilities, and services. And I'd argue that a universal definition is likely a waste of time. So as the web grows, right, so do our roles and our skills, and we can generalize or specialize, or we could focus on CSS as a whole, or we can focus on just one tiny aspect of it. And I think this is really cool, right? We've spent all of today talking about this. We can really dig into the minutiae of things and devote time to really, really understanding them. And yet, kind of, we still hang on to this, even if implicitly, right? This isn't true anymore, all right? There's no neat line to be drawn anymore. It used to be that HTML and CSS were just about presentation, whereas programming and quote-unquote development described function. And that was convenient, but isn't the case. And David said this earlier today, and I love it, because it's true. It's magical what we can do today. And I do have a couple of examples, like we've seen examples all day, right? But I just want to show all of this because, right, like, We have transforms and complex selectors and pseudo-elements, methodologies like object-oriented CSS, grid, right? These are all concepts that require a developer approach to implement and use meaningfully, right? Because, like, have you ever looked at some of the documentation, like taken a step back and looked at it for certain frameworks? Like, oh yeah, just fire up the terminal and install these dependencies and do this and do that. It's not just about including a style sheet anymore, because imagine being a beginner looking at that. And people might just say, it's just CSS, but CSS touches every aspect of the web today, and it's a key development skill, right? So here's a few more of these, right? So again, as design systems grow in popularity, so does the capability of CSS. So yeah, we saw this for GitHub's design system, and Brenda earlier showed a responsive design in 4 lines of CSS. This framework was made by a friend of mine. It's a collection of modules, self-contained, in a way that draws from JavaScript and Ruby. Dependencies are managed, imports are specified, and the CSS can actually be tested because it's, yeah. There's things like this type term site, which leverage presentation in CSS to build understanding, right, of these terms. Or you can just kind of be, or we can just be tongue-in-cheek about it. I love these, they're great. And we could build whole games in it now, right? And even if you are, like, CSS is just presentation, that's fine, but presentation, in my opinion, influences the way people feel about software, and it governs interaction, it enables interaction, and this, in turn, affects and enables function. Because if something isn't presented and can't be experienced in the right way by its intended end user, that intended end function is irrelevant. And this is CSS, right? And it deserves its place in development. But for some reason, this distinction is still made. And sometimes it's not, because it's become a ready web developer by learning Flexbox and CSS Grid. So I just want to unpack why this is a little bit, because it's difficult. It can be, right? Yeah, I'll leave that up there. But we may not say outright that CSS isn't really development, but the implication is there, right? It's there when designers ask which coding languages they should learn next and which new aspects of CSS are the most important to learn. It's in job postings, it's in salaries, it's everywhere. And if CSS isn't just design, what is it? Now, right, we seem to recognize this difficulty or this sort of lack of definition, but we don't yet know what to do with it or how to act on it. And the important question, why does any of this matter? It matters because this is an issue without a resolution yet, and that lack of resolution has its consequences, right? People are always asking, what is this? What am I? And fluidity in roles is totally fine, because we need responsibility and accountability to actually build software at the end of the day. But the titles that we hold do matter, because they impact hiring, they impact team construction, perception, and pay, not to mention the actual user experience of the thing we're building. And the weight and the gravitas that comes with this term doesn't always apply to CSS or front-end development. And what development means to me, the word, might be different to what it means to you. And not just what it means to actually practice web development, but how you learned it too, how you got there. These are things that we implicitly assign value to or devalue, the other, as Teresa put it. And they impact perceptions, both of ourselves and others. How we identify and perceive ourselves and others matters. And for a couple of years now, I've run this little side project. It's an interview series with underrepresented folks in tech who have found success, and I always ask them how they arrived in the industry. Was it via university? Were they self-taught? Did they go to boot camp? Did they trip and fall sideways into it, like I did, with Neopets and GeoCities, whatever? And I won't read these, obviously, but I've just highlighted lots of quotes because, suffice it to say, there's no one path into this, right? And I asked using the hashtag, folks from the conference, how did you find development? And these were a few of the responses that I got. And it's clear that there's all these messy journeys, right, that indicate that there's so many ways to learn this, but there's also a lot of different ways to perceive ourselves. And yet we seem to assign more value to some of these paths than others, and that value differs based on the person presenting that story as well. And there is a certain gravitas, once again, to a computer science degree, for example, but I would argue that education doesn't always mean expertise, experience, or perspective, but neither does self-taught either. All of this can make for a developer, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And we shouldn't overlook or devalue those other paths, because successful development isn't just code, but communication and interpersonal understanding. Diverse journeys into the discipline give context to that and enable us to actually build better software. So I just encourage everyone to think about this. Like, do you value these things the same way for everyone? Because I think that there is one prevailing image of the developer, right? And two paths that sort of arrive at it. One, computer science degree. And if you're kind of sitting there maybe, oh, I don't have a computer science degree, or oh, I've hired people without computer science degrees, you don't get a pass necessarily, because the lack of a computer science degree seems to be fine to be a developer, but only if you've followed this one specific other path, which is that of this kind of hustle hard, contribute to open source and code in my spare time in every free moment that I have, which is a niche dominated by the 20-something white male, and we're willing to evaluate, we're willing to adjust our value systems, based on what our perception of that developer is. And that's problematic when our perception is valued or is flawed or skewed. So, yeah, and these value systems, see, I'm using my psychology degree now, which is good, manifest as hierarchies in our brains. Right? And hierarchies are just, simply put, they're systems of organization and ranking. They let us categorize and compare things relatively. Right? And I'm concerned with what happens when our understandings of development and CSS are unclear, unspoken, and tied up with our perceptions of ourselves and our journeys into the discipline. And yeah, in short, I'm really interested in this when things get really complicated. And we're compelled to understand this. Like, we ask the question, like you saw the screenshots earlier of what is development, what's this? We want to understand this because it makes our world easier to comprehend, but also because these hierarchies affect CSS, the language, the community, and the web at large, right? We pride ourselves on the fact that anyone can be a developer. And to some degree, we do celebrate that freedom. And I try to highlight it in that Origins project, but we also devalue it when it's easy for us to do that. And usually this happens when speed becomes important, because we're trying to make sense of how to pay people too, right? How to hire and how to actually build software on time. And if we can sort of find this one mythical, legitimate path, a thing that is or isn't development, a place to draw that line, people are easy to evaluate. But again, identification matters. And to be clear, hierarchies themselves aren't actually the problem. The problem happens when we assign unequal value to different languages and backgrounds based upon our sort of implicit assumptions. And for example, think about how hierarchies might manifest, right? If two CSS developers go for the same job, one is sort of a white male and the other perhaps a non-binary person or a person of color, could you really honestly say that they would be evaluated the same way? Maybe, maybe not, right? And when we don't know, or when we aren't transparent about it, we reach into our minds for that which we do know. And when that basic knowledge is already incorrect or perhaps biased, we don't make the best decisions. So it's the opaque nature of this that creates the problems, right? And this is where the developer archetype kind of intersects with our social biases, right? Because it means that we categorize and determine someone's value before we've even interacted with them. And a CSS developer, for example, might be what your project or your organization needs, but if you don't value that as a development skill, you'll never get to hire that person. You'll never look for them. And so these hierarchies differ based on the company, based on the person, based on the job post. And then those reading the job posting, those looking at it, are left trying to infer what, if the last time you looked for a job, think about you're looking at the job posting and you're trying to infer what this person wants from you. And you pander to that. And this lack of transparency is the problem. What is perceived is hard to calculate. We've heard that already, right? And if we don't have a shared understanding of what development is or how CSS fits into it, within our companies, we can't actually clearly communicate what it is that we value. Hierarchies are most helpful when they're unambiguous. When, in that case, they're actually valuable and actionable things. And if they're just floating around in the ether somewhere, though, our biases ensure that we automatically skew in favor of a certain archetype. And also, to be clear, I'm not saying that there isn't a difference, obviously, between CSS, HTML, and languages like C or JavaScript, even. What's dangerous are the power dynamics and subtle implications that one is harder and therefore better than the other, and the creation of these developer stereotypes around them. And these biases then, which implicitly kind of perpetuate. And this becomes ingrained in us, right? And it makes us make bad decisions, and it makes us treat others poorly, even when we don't mean to, right? In the same way that categorization makes it easier to place people in roles, it also makes it easy to devalue them. So furthermore, we don't talk about it, and that too perpetuates the bias. If I don't know how your hierarchy differs from mine, we'll never come to a consensus, and that's really easy to ignore. And whether or not our journey has legitimacy, quote unquote, or whether or not we see CSS as, quote unquote, development, has impacts on how people perceive our skill as technicians. If you develop in CSS but don't know Ember, for example, are you more skilled or valuable? Why? Are you worth more money? Do you get more credibility? If you learned at a boot camp or just built a robot in your basement, or you learned via, as I did, your Neopets Guild page, which is better? And when we perceive people as skilled, we give them power, right? And when those perceptions or attributions are not transparent, how do we know what our value is? And until now, it's been the assumptions of those already in power that govern perception and value. We say that legitimacy is based on meritocracy, but it's not. And we know it's not. It's a bit harsh, but it's true. And this struggle for legitimacy is especially important for the underrepresented and the marginalized, people we need in this industry. Right? These hierarchies take power away from those who should have it, to whom we should be giving it, and prevent them from taking part. People are excluded from code reviews or courses based on perceived language and expertise, and their input is lost as a result. And this point really needs belaboring because it's about the interaction of the technical and the social, and it prevents people at the low end of these implicit hierarchies from participating in our communities and contributing to CSS development through no fault of their own, right? And this is complicated because there are so many sort of hierarchies to juggle, and which groups we arbitrarily assign high or low value to, right? And until now, we've just kind of accepted that and done very little to change it. But this also has impact on salary too. So if I think development is worth a lot of money, but implicitly CSS isn't real development, then CSS isn't worth as much money. Pay scales become arbitrary, right? If the person doing that development is then part of a minority group, we pay them even less. There are also mental health consequences to this. When you see someone as less valuable in any way, you behave differently towards them. Again, whether you intend to or not. And just because you might see it as CSS isn't real development, maybe we say it jokingly, but it doesn't mean that others perceive it that way too. And so speaking of the products that we build, right, a devaluing of CSS and developer journeys means an impact on that as well. Remember that presentation, again, governs interaction and it governs access and therefore function. And when we ignore CSS as a development skill, we compromise the language. We compromise the people who use it and the industry, right, by making bad software where the user experience and performance suffer. And yeah, so finally, as CSS splinters into its own subdisciplines and specialties, we do have to be aware of how we're creating and assigning value to those subdisciplines. We have the potential to fracture these communities as they're being built, and we don't want that. So what can we do then? That's theoretically why I'm here. I'm here to kind of offer some, hopefully, a starting point. And I'm not suggesting that we get rid of what is a fundamental human behavior, right? Because again, hierarchies are fine. They make us feel safe. They help us process the world. But what I'm saying is that they should be transparent, enforceable, and concrete. And they should be changeable too. They should be malleable, right? We should feel comfortable sharing them and challenging them. And first and foremost, right, acknowledge that we will come to the table, like say we're hiring someone, with different value systems. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. We should follow that, though, with transparency. We can't confront that which we can't see. If we don't know we disagree, or we're afraid to admit that we disagree, we can't make things better. If we aren't clear on the differences between our own hierarchies, we strip them of their actual effectiveness, right? We can't clearly act on any of that. So what I'm wondering is, like, individually and organizationally, what would happen if we wrote down, like, actually sat and tried to articulate what we believe or what we perceive to be a web developer? And don't just ask the question, because it's easy to toss the question out there, but actually answer it concretely. And if these hierarchies are, in theory, very obvious, then it should be easy to state them, right, and be accountable to them. And this is really important as well. Be hyper-aware and be honest with each other. Like, check assumptions not just at the door, but throughout. We can call each other on them. And in organizations, this takes vulnerability. You have to trust your coworkers. And those who are not marginalized or underrepresented have to take that first step. And again, you may have different perceptions, even within the team, of what front-end development or engineering is, and what qualification or journey is expected for someone to be successful in your company. But you just need to be open about it. And if you don't want to or hesitate to, then chances are the hierarchy that you have isn't necessarily a good one. And those who have hiring power can get across to people that we value the skill that they bring, not the language that the skill manifests in. If we can shout about CSS's development, we can and should. Focus on the skill sets and perspectives that people are bringing to us. Right? Because inclusivity is difficult enough without questions about how or where we acquired those development skills, or which are development skills to begin with. And that said, kind of in the meantime, those who are juniors or those who are looking for jobs, we know now that there's this gravitas to the word developer, technical proficiency tied up with credibility, right? That for some reason CSS doesn't always get. And use the word to your advantage, right? Don't be afraid to call yourself a developer if you feel that you are, right? And in a broad context, this approach means putting minority groups in decision-making roles and challenging hierarchies by deviating from them. We pride ourselves so often on being an innovative industry, so let's be innovative in our teams and in the roles rather than just in our software. And so I ask this question in the title of my talk, and in true kind of Canadian fashion, I suppose my answer is a bit of a cop-out. I'm sorry about that, because it depends, right? But we can take a step back and ask, what shouldn't make one? Like, and why do we feel that it shouldn't? Lines are arbitrary. Sometimes lines are boring, right? We don't all have to agree on what should or shouldn't make a developer. I'm not saying that. A universal definition would be so general so as to be pointless. But it's worth knowing what you value and what your organization values. And I acknowledge very much that this isn't an easy thing to do, because removing lines like this means adding complexity. And what I'm proposing here is that those of us who think these hierarchies are so obvious actually take a good look at them, document them, and make them an open thing. And if it is obvious, that'll be an easy exercise. And it'll make you feel good about your honesty and transparency. But if it isn't, then trying to articulate them will be beneficial to the organization too. And I'm not talking about right or wrong here either, just openness. It's a small step. Was it like incremental correctness, we called it, right? We don't have to go all the way, we just have to take the first step. And only then can we actually drive meaningful change in one direction or another. And none of this is easy, right? But so what? Right? It's fine to be finding our way. It's fine to be uncomfortable with disagreement. But what's not fine is allowing these myths to kind of fester and impact people negatively because we're avoiding having our opinions challenged, right? And it's funny to me sometimes that we are quick to use disagreement, or not quick to use it, but that we use disagreement to improve CSS as code or improve languages, right? But not to improve the environments of the people who write in those languages, or our understanding of their skills, right? Or challenging these one-dimensional archetypes. So in these interpersonal situations, it is hard to admit, to ourselves and to others that we may have hurt someone else, especially if we were acting with good intentions. But it's okay to make a mistake because, again, we're still finding our way. What matters is that we put our money where our mouths are and actually learn from our failures like we say we do. And no, I don't provide a neat solution, and again, I'm sorry. But this new understanding, I don't believe it's optional, because we pride ourselves, again, on solving hard problems. And so let's solve this one, right? Empower development and interaction and perspective of all kinds, and figure it out together. All right, we can come together if we can't come together on a common definition, or we don't want to, we can at least be open about the definition of development that we are working with, and understand that there are many paths into this, and value them equally. And I first gave this talk a while back, or a version of it, and since then we have kind of partially acknowledged how hard CSS is and can be, and that's a step in the right direction, right? We recognize the need for legitimacy in recognizing each other's journeys and each other's disciplines. And I believe that this is worthwhile, right? Again, we can start with incremental correctness, acknowledge the value of your journey and that of the person's next to you. I love hearing about how people in development, like how it found them and grabbed them and didn't let go. And I love finding new ways to perceive it. We can always change our hierarchies and better understand the relationship of CSS to the rest of the web, right? And when we better know what we value, and when we communicate better what we value and how, we can know where to spend our energies, right? How to put together better teams and make better software and make sure that our community, the community that we're building here today and when we go home, like we can make that community as amazing as we know it can be, both technically and otherwise. So thank you so very much for listening to me, for sticking around. And I now hand it over to Carolina to close. Thank you so much.